What does a box of Triscuits and Homer Stokes have in common? Well, nothing. But it's Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Stations, with Trey Savage and Aaron Brill back next. Okay, so listen, we got to get us some. Look, it's Senator Hicks did your vote counts. Spencer Hicks, her husband, is a comedian, a pretty famous comedian, and he has a joke about Triscuits, and we won't tell it. But I just wanted to let you know.
I think you can tell it.
I think you can tell it.
Yeah.
You think the
Tell
Triscuits
the Triscuit
You want me to
joke.
tell it? You just told me it.
Go ahead.
So
I'm not responsible.
Last night I ate a whole box of Triscuits, and it was great. But this morning I woke up and I made a wicker basket.
And how did you make a wicker basket?
We don't even.
The Spencer Hicks joke. It's good. That's
Just Google Spencer. You can get the whole joke if you
Senator
want to.
Hicks had him out on the doorstep knocking, and that worked out well. So I'm sorry, Spencer, for stealing your joke.
Yeah, it's a great joke.
Too early in the morning.
It really is. And Homer Stokes, you started this whole thing about Brother Where Art Thou jokes about government reform.
On Twitter, yeah.
That's how this all got. If you're not following us on Twitter, you have to follow Savage, or your Twitter handle is
at Thrice Savage, THRICE, and you can THRICE Savage, SAVAGE.
You know, there's some very influential people on Twitter. I don't know if you know any of them. Mine's at Mitchell Talks. I should say that if you don't follow Twitter, and your Twitter handle is
At News 9.
Okay.
At News 9.
So
we should probably mention too that Traces with nondoc.com.
Oh yeah, those people too.
We're really messing this up today. You want to just start over?
No, we don't want to start. Here's what we need to say. You started writing stories about these boards and commissions. There's a disagreement between the Senate and the House, and then it got funny on Twitter. But the fact is, it's pretty serious negotiations, right?
Yeah, this is kind of one of the issues that is there's a little disagreement between the chambers. That's not that uncommon. I will say that I think everybody involved is emphasizing that, in fact, while there's disagreement, everybody wants to go the same place. Everybody wants to pursue agency accountability, transparency. Governor Stitt has said he wants to appoint all boards or certain directors of agencies, and there was maybe an agreement that then kind of maybe fell apart, and now the two chambers are kind of running a little more separate versions of those bills. I assume they will continue to work together to try to find a way to do that. Basically, the Senate would prefer to eliminate the boards. The governor's administration says that in a perfect world, he would like to eliminate the boards entirely. The House wants to retain the boards as an advisory position, as well as have other things like impeachment power of agency directors. There's a whole bunch of issues that this kind of causes. It's sort of you rearrange one brick and a bunch of other things kind of move too.
And there's clearly some concerns about the governor having too much power, the governor appointing the people that he wants to be certain heads of different agencies. But we also know that right now the agencies aren't held accountable the way they should be. So there's a perfect answer out there somewhere, we just haven't found it yet.
Well, the governor appointed those geniuses on the State Department of Health Board.
Right.
I mean, you can argue this one round or flat, can't you?
I think there's plenty of examples of why there needs to be more accountability. The question is how does the state get there, and what are some of the details that probably are beyond public purview. But even if you look back to what happened with DHS and the major federal civil rights lawsuit, or I suppose the most recent one, if you will, in the history of the state of Oklahoma, I think in 2012 the state wound up. Voters voted 59.9% in favor of eliminating the DHS commission and going to a direct appointment position for the head of that agency. I think things are better over there now in a lot of ways, but that's also because of the Pinnacle Plan, which was the settlement agreement in this federal lawsuit. So, that's not necessarily to say that the same thing will happen. Additionally, I remember working with a state representative who, back when there was funding shortfalls for DHS and all the health agencies after the cigarette fee was thrown out, there was a woman I spoke with who had an issue with DHS, and I, not having remembered that 6 years ago we'd abolished the DHS commission, I said, well, you might consider going to their next board meeting. Realized there was no board meeting, and so I think some people believe that you need to have an accountable entity like a board for people to go and have time to voice their concerns or find out other information. As journalists, I think that we would believe that board meetings have a purpose and a value, because if you can't get the director to call you back, if you can't get anybody to answer your questions on what's going on at a state agency, you know as a journalist that you can go and show up to the public board meeting and stick a microphone in someone's face. So, just from our perspective, which is not to say that we have a perspective on how best to do the reforms, but I do think we can point out that there is a benefit to having a board meeting. But at the same time, the Board of Health did not know what was going on at the agency they were supposed to oversee. The Healthcare Authority had a waiver expire with the federal government in 2001 that was not brought to anybody's attention in the colleges that it affected until 2017. You have other examples of situations where boards are not doing, the oversight they need to. So it's not an easy fix, and I think that's why there's some disagreement about how to do it.
Would either of you think that, we'll just lay this one out there, would have more boards and commissions involved in the big agencies? That's not a model for efficiency. Or is it?
Now say that again.
If you've got these people between the governor and these agencies, that's not an efficient model, is it? I mean, it may be transparent, you may have somebody to talk to, but if you're trying to get, if you have somebody that you can call and say, get this done or you're fired, that's efficiency. So maybe people don't want that.
I see. That's a good point. I think that's why that at least among Republican leadership in the state, the governor and both chambers, they believe we should have the governor should have the ability to directly appoint and fire. The question is between them about the boards. Democrats would prefer to retain the board's appointment and hiring of folks, but I don't know to what extent it makes that big of a difference, because I think one of the criticisms that I've always thought is legitimate for agency directors is that they're very often too scared and too concerned about their own employment to make the decisions that we think that appear obvious that they need to make. And I think that whether you're being reappointed by your board and thus you can't really kind of give them the accurate situation about what's going on, or you can't come out and say what you think you should directly say, or whether you've got to play politics because of the governor, I'm not sure that there's really any way to fix that part of it.
But I think boards are important. They offer a system of checks and balances. They offer outside thoughts besides just having one person. I think it's important.
We should point out that was the Homer Stokes reference.
Was reform.
He tried to reform. Yeah. He didn't win the election, and it ultimately was a bad angle. There's some other stuff going. You've been writing about, Mr. Savage, dealing with aggregates. You want to help us out on that one?
Yeah. So this floor, I think, is made out of concrete, and concrete is made out of essentially rock and sand. I learned this week that there, in a cubic yard of concrete, there is basically 1 ton of rock or gravel or whatever that would be, and then 1 ton of sand, I'm sorry, about 0.7 tons of sand. So there's a proposal to attempt to create a new gross production tax opportunity on the production of what is called aggregates, mostly sand, gravel, rock, different elements that are mined from the ground, which is a big issue in south central and certainly southeastern Oklahoma. But most counties in the state have some sort of aggregate production. But it's a really big issue down around Johnston County. And who represents Johnston County, or at least part of it? The Speaker of the House, Charles McCall. And so I thought it was kind of interesting to realize that once again, the Speaker, now in his capacity as Speaker, this is the first time since he's been Speaker that he's run this bill, is trying to authorize counties to be able to vote on their own 10-cent per ton aggregate tax. And that would be directed toward road and bridge projects in the county that votes for this. County commissioners could put it up for a vote. 5% of the eligible voters in the county could do an initiative petition and put it up for a vote. But it would be county by county. Now, the industry, very much believes this would be a job-killing effort, that this would raise prices. It would actually just pass higher prices on to major consumers in the state of aggregates, which are primarily construction companies that build roads, bridges, any buildings, any housing. So that's kind of the big argument. But certainly for folks down in that part of the state, there appears to be some exhaustion with the notion of all of this mining being done and kind of the natural environment being changed enormously for no tax benefit in the state, especially when it gets on the rail and goes down to Texas.
Right, and that's the argument. A lot of it in favor of this tax is that you've got this very heavy equipment carrying very, very heavy aggregates, destroying roads, and then most of this stuff is leaving the state anyhow without any type of taxation. So who's paying for the roads? The local municipalities, the counties.
The irony being that the cost of the roads might actually increase, slightly if the amount of tax added to the aggregates, if that was included. So it's an interesting situation. I guess an average truck that you would see carrying this stuff can carry about 25 tons. So at 10 cents a ton, we're talking about $2.50. $2.50. So if you had two trucks, you'd have $5 trucks. It doesn't seem like a lot of tax, but then I talked to a guy from DeLisi Brothers who said, I've worked in rock sales my whole life, and to me, 10 cents is a big deal. I've lost business over dimes. And so I think there's that feeling as well. So it's interesting to see if this moves. It passed out of the House in 2015 when Speaker McCall carried it. He wasn't the Speaker at the time. It died in a Senate committee vote. A lot of urban lawmakers are not as likely to pass this.
Speaking of things that are getting stoned, the Eccles bill.
Where?
The Eccles bill for medical marijuana passed with some of the other regulations. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's called the Unity Bill. I don't know that there's quite as much unity maybe as that would imply. But I missed a little bit of that 3-hour debate yesterday morning.
It was a pretty lengthy debate.
So I can't say that I was super sad to miss that debate, because this has all kind of been talked about a lot. And one of the remaining concerns I hear people saying is that there's not maybe enough transparency about who's overseeing the companies that are being set up, and since there was not a cap put on the number of grow or dispensary licenses put out, that you have sort of a wild west of business competition. On the other hand, I think people are kind of trying to move forward as quickly as they can to get homegrown industry up before maybe national or international cannabis companies come into the market.
Yeah, it's a brand new industry, and they stressed this is not the be-all, end-all. This is step one, and what's going to be a lot of rules that are going to be written over the decades regarding medicinal marijuana. But what they tried to do, you remember the Department of Health immediately put out their rules and regulations regulating medical marijuana, and it just completely usurped the will of the people. It was no smokables, only so much in edibles, that kind of a thing. This did away with that. This it improves the testing so that you know that the type of marijuana that you're getting has the potency that it's supposed to have. It makes sure there's no chemicals or heavy metals associated with it. Heavy metals in pot, dude. So that kind of stuff. It's more along the lines of what the people seem to have voted in favor of, but certain regulations for safety. But there are still a lot of concerns, like taxing. How are we going to be taxing these entities when they're not allowed to use bank accounts, because the federal government still doesn't recognize the medicinal benefits of marijuana? So that's another problem that we're reaching.
Ken, wait, it's not going to have anything to do with the advertising, right? I mean, how long until we start seeing the Marie Osmond for Bob's Dubs? Because it's coming, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are potential issues in terms of advertising through, like I know, for instance, Google. So a plug for nondoc.com, if you want to advertise here, we'll run your pot ads. But there are issues with federal advertising rules as it relates, and so I think in that uncertainty, Google Ads does not run medical marijuana, or does not run marijuana ads, to my knowledge. I don't know what the TV rules are. That'd be a good question for the station folks here. But yeah, that's an issue, and I don't you know, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit over it, if you want to be honest with you. I mean, I think that Representative Eccles, who was here earlier, you know, he made a joke yesterday in his press conference that you know, he's talked about it and talked about it and talked about it, you know, and I think that at least I'm, you know, would rather just mellow out and you know, pass it to the left.
Okay, we'll end it on that one right there. Hey, listen, it's great to have you here, okay? I always appreciate the work at NonDoc. Glad
Thank you,
you're back
Scott.
in business.
Thank you.
As always, Mr. Brillback, great to see you.
Good seeing you.
Thanks for watching this. See us next week. But now here's where you can find this again. You can follow me on Twitter at Mitchell Talks. See it again at news9.com/yourvotecounts. We'll see you next week.